Hello, welcome everyone to Prophecy Roundtable. We're sorry for the delay. That would be my fault. A couple of technical difficulties, but we are excited tonight. We are going to talk about that alien something that was apparently found in Peru. We're going to discuss that, and we have author Tim Cohen here to discuss it with us. So, really excited. Hey, guys, it's really great to be with you tonight.
Same here.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right. Well, so this is kind of a big deal, or maybe not. That's really the big question. I know some other people have, well, a lot of people have weighed in on this thing. I actually got to do a conference with Mr. Mauso some years ago. It was a MUFON conference. He was an interesting individual. At first, I was quite impressed, but then I did a little digging and I was like, ooh. So now that doesn't mean that this is necessarily fraudulent, but he does have a track record that it doesn't speak super high. So, well, let's look at the data that we have available, and let's just kind of take a look and see maybe if we can come up with some ideas what this might mean. What we think this is. Tim, I would love to hear what you think about this. I think it'd be awesome.
Well, I know humanoids exist and they're real, but on this particular find, I'm reminded of the movie E.T. and creative artists in Peru.
Okay.
To be quite honest.
Creative artists in Peru. Okay.
Yeah.
Please go on.
I think it's a fake.
I think it's a fake. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, they put together whole fake bodies before, and then they used children's bodies and different things to try to present them as humanoids, and inevitably it's discredited. I think that this will probably be discredited. And the face really does look too much like E.T. to me. So, it to me, it just reeks of forgery, but we'll see.
Mm-hmm. Well, so I did find something on Reddit, which I don't know if that's the greatest of resources, but there is someone who says that he translated this from Jose de Jesus Salce Benitez, a forensic science specialist. And he says that he did all of this. He did X-ray, commuted tomography, three-dimensional reconstructions, macroscopic and microscopic analyses, histology, carbon-14, forensic anthropology, comparative anatomy, and DNA analysis, which is the queen of evidence in forensic sciences for comparative studies. And he says, I can affirm that these bodies are not related to human beings. For this purpose, I will start with a description of the images that we will see next. Okay, and so then he, of course, gives a description suggesting that these are 1,000 years old per the carbon-14 dating. For the anatomy, there's a humanoid structure. There are 3 fingers on each hand. And it says the bone structure of the entire skeleton shows its perfect harmony and agreement between the joints. The head is larger relative to the body. It's larger than average, which would suggest a very large brain. Some other things about the neck, the thorax. We have a fork very similar to that of birds, which allows the shoulder joints to continue to have wide mobility capabilities. Then the abdomen, they found the evidence of the presence of 3 eggs, thanks to the tomography. They're able to show at a millimetric level that there are oviducts and the presence of millimetric eggs. So that's 100% confirmation, they claim, that are biological and organic, since the process of replication or reproduction through these eggs and their development in the oviduct would be impossible to falsify. All right, so those are just some of the different things. And then as far as the DNA analysis, they suggest that this thing is 70% different, but 30% matching with humans. So interesting. Now I did find it interesting thinking about Gilgamesh, that Gilgamesh, for those that don't know, Gilgamesh probably is Nimrod or Ninurta, based on the linguistic evidence that we have. According to the stories. He was 18 feet tall. In fact, there is an 18-foot statue of Gilgamesh in the Louvre in France. And he's holding a lion like a woman might hold a chihuahua. And do you hold chihuahuas like that? I don't know. Something like that. But anyway, and so Gilgamesh, according to the claim, was 30% human. So, I mean, at this point, we don't have good evidence, either way. I looked at it and I was kind of like, I don't know. Some of the naysayers are suggesting that it was a bunch of bones that were kind of scrapped together, and it's a clever, I guess, a clever forgery, but not that clever. So I don't know, Scott. What's your take?
I was actually going to ask Tim when he said earlier about humanoids. Are you describing what we might refer to as Nephilim, or like hybrids between the sons of God and humans? Is that what you meant?
Yeah, most of the humanoids today are completely manufactured. There's no component that's Nephilim. If you wanted to talk about a humanoid being possessed by a demon in the same way that a human being might be, then you might call them a secondary Nephil. And that's kind of how I view them. But in general, humanoids look more like grays in some of the reptoid portrayals and some of the mantid type portrayals that you might find even in science fiction. They look closer to that than what this individual has come up with, these two figures. And they've made some pretty impressive claims. And I think they were actually saying that 30% of the DNA was unknown, supposedly. But regardless, they've presented no actual photos of any of those internal scans or tests. I mean, no data, no lab reports, no photos, other than just the two behind the glass photos of these supposed, fossilized beings. To me, it's just a bunch of claims with no evidence to back it, and it looks a lot more like ET. That's just how it seems right now.
In my view, it's sort of a drip that the media is even reporting it. In other words, it's been a drip, and now they're turning up the faucet with this alien disclosure. And Tim and I, we spoke very briefly compared to our normal phone conversations. I usually call him and we're talking an hour and a half later, but I had work to do today. But and he made a very good point that he is not, his research into this and what he's done in his research is not so much for the Christian. It's really for those that are not Christians who might be deceived about what's coming. And I think that's why Doug and I even do these shows. It's entertaining, it's fascinating, it's interesting to discuss, but all the three of us and most of our listeners already have a solid foundation on what these entities are. And it's more to, I guess, discuss and educate audience and give some different viewpoints so we can talk to our friends, family members who might actually believe in little green men or aliens or panspermia theory and things of that nature. So our other guests couldn't make it tonight, and Doug wanted to do aliens again. So I was like, okay, well, I'll call Tim.
Well, I do think that we are going to have a time when it becomes very much accepted within the public view. I think people are open to the idea that we did come from aliens. You have directed panspermia, as you suggested. But this thing, to me, just looking at it from the basic reading that I've done, I don't have a solid feeling about this. You also have, what's his name here? You have the Navy pilot Ryan Graves, who, was one of the 2004 Navy pilots that saw the so-called Tic Tacs. He's suggesting that, we need actual evidence instead of just kind of circus kind of stuff. So, here you have people that have some pretty wild experiences, and yet this doesn't seem to really, feel very credible to them either. So, it's really hard. It's hard. If we had more evidence, if we could actually see the x-rays, if we could see, the various things. I mean, I think they did put out some pictures. So, they did put out some pictures. We're a little bit armchair quarterbacking here, But then again, I think the person that it's connected with doesn't have the best track record, and he's put out some hoaxes before. And when you cry wolf, then guess what? People are more likely not to believe it the next time around. So, we do have some credibility issues with their Mr. Mauso, and so I don't know. I mean, again, I have not actually studied it personally. I haven't gone to see this thing, but it does kind of feel like it's a circus more than something that's really hardcore.
So I can, if you don't mind, say a few things. Mr. Graves is a credible witness. The Tic Tac videos are real. The people who spoke to Congress are not actually the first people to talk about such craft that are Tic Tac shaped. There was a whistleblower who came out several years prior who was talking about engaging the actual so-called aliens at military bases who are aboard craft precisely like those, landing the craft actually at the bases. So there's a lot that's not being told to the public. I listened to the congressional testimony, and it was mostly true, what they shared, but there's an awful lot that they didn't share that I happen to know factually. And in terms of actual evidence, if I had been sitting there as part of that panel, I could have actually shown photos, real ones, of what's on Mars and the moon and other bodies in our solar system that NASA and other space agencies have taken that they're not talking about publicly. So, and I'm prepared to show a few tonight. Although, Doug, if you've watched, I know Scott probably has at this point, but if you watched, for example, the 5-hour interview I have with a non-Christian on my YouTube channel, you will see some photos in that of actual fossils on those different bodies in our solar system that are officially sourced photos that people, once my Solar Apocalypse series is published, will be able to, in many cases, download directly from the space agencies themselves.
Wow. Share them. I think it'd be fascinating.
That's what myself and him in LA spoke about a little bit, and some of it. Share your number 1, 2, or 3, Tim.
Well, there's no number 1, 2, or 3. I mean, I've told Scott I have tens of thousands, and I'll share some decent ones in the series.
Share 3 with us.
Yeah,
you got to pick
I can
a
definitely
couple.
do that. So let me pick my screen here, and then I'll.
Absolutely.
I assume that it's such that I can share my screen here.
You should be able to, yes. Yeah. So
for some reason,
I just think that we are coming up to a time when we're going to have, I think the UFO phenomenon. I think it's very much part of the satanic deception. I think this is kind of all stage setting so that when the 2 witnesses do show up, Satan can say, "Oh, hey, I'm here. You know that we've been around. You know that we've been, doing the Tic Tac thing, and maybe we've done the gray alien thing, perhaps." There have been a lot of testimonies of people that have claimed to have been abducted, and the evidence is pretty powerful that indeed they have been abducted. I think all of this is the backdrop, because I think, the bottom line is that Satan doesn't know when the curtain is going to come up. God is the one who decides when Jesus can take the scroll in his hand and then start opening those seals. That's completely on God's timeline. But Satan obviously has a plan. He wants to get things going. And, he has to have the stage set so that when that curtain goes up, he has a story ready to go. And I think all of these things that we're seeing right now, maybe or maybe not what we're seeing right now with this evidence from Peru, but I think a lot of what we're seeing is supposed to get us essentially ready for what's coming. So, you ready, Tim? Shall I put that on the screen now?
Yeah, I'm trying to stop my computer from opening a bunch of stuff I don't want it opening here.
I understand that.
Yeah. So I'm just going to point out where people can go and see more later, because I'm going to run through this pretty fast due to our time limitations.
Okay, sounds good.
And where you also can go see it. So I'm just going to run into a few highlights that they can see in greater detail and much more actually in this right here that I'm circling. It's called Non-Terrestrial Life, and maybe I can zoom in on it a little bit to make it easier to see. I don't know here. This one right here. So it's titled Non-Terrestrial
Okay.
Life Proof. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So that's on my YouTube channel, which is just author Tim Cohen right here. Yeah, and so now coming back to this, I'm going to run through this really fast. If you have questions, just ask me afterwards. So this is a flash fossilized nodosaur from Earth found in Canada. One of the best fossils ever found on Earth. It's about 30 feet in length, but you can see that the external appearance of the thing is preserved, right?
Mm-hmm.
In fact, it's a greenish color. If you were to see it in the museum in many places, the pigmentation itself is even preserved as part of the fossilization. Took a man 7 years to chisel that out of stone and expose it. If all you could see was something like this lying on the surface of the ground, let's say this from a bit of a distance, you'd probably have a difficult time distinguishing it from a rock, right?
Okay.
Now on Mars, there's more of the chemistry than there is on Earth, and even than there was in the pre-flood Earth for this kind of fossilization, which is called flash fossilization, where a creature can turn to stone in a matter of hours to days, maybe up to a month, but so rapidly that it doesn't have time to decay to bones before the bones have fossilized. And in fact, in labs today, they can take a fish that just died and fossilize it within hours completely. And that takes a mixture of water in the right temperature range, semi-warm to warm, a lot of bacteria, the right bacteria, and then the proper chemistry from certain chemicals in the water and the soil. And then that can happen very quickly. There's more of it on Mars than on Earth. Back when Mars had, a liquid water ocean, thousands of years ago, I would say, not, the claims of macroevolutionists for when the catastrophe struck Mars. So this is a rover from NASA driving up to a piece of petrified wood with lichen on it on Mars. If this is the only photo we had, it proves the existence of ongoing complex biology on Mars.
How do we know that that's wood?
This is what wood looks like after it's petrified and fractured. And it's got the fibrous kind of appearance of wood. Okay. But the more important piece is this right here, the lichen. And lichen is complex biology. It's more complex than simply bacteria. Mm-hmm. So it's actually viewed as a complex life form. And you've got ongoing living lichen on Mars. And that's a NASA photo. They don't talk about it publicly.
Is the lichen claim, is that your analysis or that somebody else claiming that?
Multiple people have seen this and said that about this. But I also show in the series, which is called Solar Apocalypse, and people can see that on Prof. CS's website. It'll be coming out. Okay.
So, I mean, like, who's
mushrooms,
saying this? Who's saying
fungus,
lichen?
and lots of other things.
I mean, who's saying that it's lichen?
I present papers in the Solar Apocalypse series, so I won't go into that now because we'll run out of time.
But these are people that have
biologists and scientists.
Biologists and stuff? Okay.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Go on.
Yeah. And they talk about other things like mushrooms and fungus on Mars and things like that. But there's much more impressive things to see. This is a flash fossilized iguana. So many of the fossils on Mars, you only see heads, but in some cases you see the complete creature literally standing or sitting the way that it fossilized, turned to stone. This is an iguana. You can see the back leg here. It's got a couple fossils stuck to the end of its tail, like a little head right here. And other than that, it looks just like a terrestrial iguana, except it's dead and it's stone. NASA took 5 photos of this with a rover. This is on Mars. They don't talk about that.
Why do you think they would not talk about it when one of the things they're looking for is life?
Because they aren't. They're trying to slow walk everything. They knew that there was ongoing microbial life, bacterial life on Mars in the 1970s with the Viking landers. They had 3 experiments aboard each of the 2 landers. And they had agreed that, if any one of these came up positive, it was strong evidence of microbial life on Mars. Of those 3 experiments, 2 of the 3 on both of the landers came up as strong positive. 1 did not. And the one that didn't is known to fail even on Earth. It was a defective experiment. But because NASA had the one that failed, they claimed, therefore, we don't have sufficient evidence of microbial life on Mars.
And Tim's theory postulation is when the flood happened, it wasn't just life on Earth was destroyed. In other words, Yah didn't just destroy the Earth. There was a solar type of apocalypse or solar destruction in which the Nephilim had seeded other planets, etc. So that's his thesis, his theory. That's where he's going at. For your audience, Doug, that didn't listen to myself and LA's video and discussion on this topic. That's and I've listened to his 5-hour. He's talking to essentially an atheist or an agnostic who's a UFO guy. And he presents a much longer presentation. So if anybody's interested in this and wants to hear a much, much longer presentation from Tim, it's like an interview for him, but Tim's doing his presentation. That would go to Tim's YouTube channel, and he lays it out for a very long time. And so,
okay, awesome.
That's the thesis. Am I summing it up correctly, Tim?
Yeah, reasonably. What I'm postulating, suggesting, is there was one or more planetary bodies extant between Mars and Jupiter among the several planetoids that had been populated, seeded by chimeric hybrids from Earth by the Nephilim, who were the first chimeric hybrids on Earth. So in other words, they weren't just creating the dangerous dinosaurs here on Earth from the life that God made here, but they were going beyond that and seeding this stuff all over the solar system very rapidly.
And that God essentially blew up a planet which then destroyed this life on these other planets that are still existing. That was part of the way he put things back in order. That's your thesis.
Yeah, sorry, I forgot to say that. So he blew up one or more of those bodies between Mars and Jupiter and pelted the whole solar system. Said Mars was very badly damaged. Our moon was badly damaged. And by the way, Doug, I give evidence in the Solar Apocalypse series that our moon had a liquid water ocean and an atmosphere before Noah's flood, before that damage transpired to our moon. And the moon shielded Earth from a lot of that bombardment, but we know from craters on Earth that enough got through to damage the surface of the planet. And I believe that was all used by God to trigger the flood on Earth, to, as a catalyst to collapse the water vapor canopy atmosphere, the thicker atmosphere Earth had prior to Noah's flood, and to punch the holes through it so that we had those windows to heaven where you could see into space. Yeah. And then also to fracture the supercontinent or supercontinental shell that our planet had prior to the flood, so that the pillars beneath that were crushed and water came up from beneath that supershell or supercontinent to flood the surface of the Earth from below, just as it was raining for 40 days and 40 nights from above.
Interesting. Wow.
Now, and that aligns much with what Henry Morris and other young Earth creationists have postulated as to why we're a young Earth. I'm not young Earth or old Earth, but I'm very, very much young Adam. But to Tim's point, there's definitely evidence on Mars, and I mean, you can get a high-powered telescope and look to Mars and Venus and the Moon, and you can see the craters that occur. And craters don't occur unless there's impact.
I mean, I've watched a number of documentaries on Mars. I've gone to museums and whatnot, and they very often postulate that there used to be water there, and they kind of wonder what happened, right? So nobody seems to know, but it's an interesting theory, Tip. Okay, go on.
Yeah, well, actually, they now know that there's liquid water underneath Mars' surface, still large oceans of it, and that there's a lot of frozen ice covered by this red dust, which is really rust produced by cyanobacteria on Mars' surface. So beneath a lot of that muddy surface, which at the hottest parts on Mars during the daytime, like at the equator, can get up to 70 degrees Fahrenheit roughly, to turn that soil to mud, basically. There's actually a lot of water there, and enough, in fact, to sustain ongoing life. And I do get into that in the Solar Apocalypse series. But
do you have any thoughts as to why the ancient religions, the pagan religions, equated Mars with Nimrod, Marduk, the god of war? Any thoughts on that?
Yes. There are a lot of structures on Mars. They didn't just transport life. They were building a civilization there. And probably humans and or humanoids, probably a mix on Mars before the destruction came. So there could be actual breakaway human civilizations even now on other planetary bodies that are extant from that. For example, from those who survived in space who weren't struck by that bombardment in conjunction with Noah's flood. So I'll come back to this, but let me just point this thing out real quick because I want to run through this quickly. This is actually a creature, and it's not easily recognized by itself, but you see what looks like a potential eye here, a potential mouth here, a body, maybe a shell on the back, okay? I wouldn't expect you to accept that explanation just from this photo. Even though it's actually a pretty decent photo by a lot of people's standards. It is not by mine. It's okay. But why I'm showing this to you is when I get further down here in this presentation, which I have given in the past, in this set of photos here, that creature you were just looking at was right here, and you can see it's not present in this photo here.
Mm-hmm.
So if I enlarge this a bit, you don't see anything right here. That's exactly where it was, where I was showing it to you. Here's another photo. And by the way, if you look at this, this is a double-like tail coming off the end of this fossil. We'll see that a bit larger here in a moment. So again, you don't see the creature here. Here it is. This is the one that was enlarged that I was showing you just a moment ago. Right here. There it is. Now it's absent right here. But when we come down here, you see it here again. And I did these so that people could see some of the changes over here. But right here, you'll notice the creature is now here. So it was here, then it wasn't here, and now it's right here. So I'll just run through that again. It's here, and then there's nothing right there. Okay. And then it's here, and there's nothing right there. Okay. Again, and then when we go back up here, excuse me, here, it's not here, and it's also not here. Now that's a series of still photos taken by one of the rovers, at a fairly close distance. And you have to say, okay, what is that thing? Because according to NASA, there's not enough atmospheric pressure on Mars even to move dust easily, let alone something the size of what we were just looking at here in that series of photos. In other words, you can't reasonably argue based on NASA's claims that that's some object that got blown into and out of the photo. So to me, that suggests ongoing life on Mars, that series of photos. So we'll just go on past that now. This is an orbital photo on Mars. Does that look like dunes to you, Doug?
I don't know. It looks kind of alligatorish.
It looks like a reptile.
In fact, it threw JPL so much that even JPL said, quote, "These North Polar dunes look odd, like a plant or fossil or some alien creature." And of course, they lied in those first two. It's not a plant, it's not a fossil, and it's not dunes. Okay. It's either an artificial structure with incredible symmetry, or it's a fossil. The problem with the fossil argument, and it may or may not be a problem, is that the actual length of this thing is about 34 miles. It's an orbital photo. In other words, that thing would have a head that would be a mile or more in size easily. And this is an infrared of the exact same area. And you can see that this thing appears to extend in either direction so that it's possibly twice the length of what's exposed above the ice. If this thing's a creature, it puts Godzilla to shame. I mean, Godzilla's like a flea by comparison almost, okay? It's an impossibly large thing, and it's either an artificial structure or it's a creature, but it suggests the possibility of real life in the past, kaiju or titans, like what you see in Japanese lore or mythology, only even bigger. Okay? All right, now this is a fossil that is on a comet, not photographed by NASA. This was photographed by the European Space Agency. You're looking at a head right here, and this is not edited at all, by the way. This is exactly the way it was photographed, just cropped and enlarged, no editing whatsoever. You're looking at a head that is sticking out of the side of a comet, and here you can see the jaw area, the mouth, the nose, the eye, and the ear is either here or here. I think it's back here, but in any case, this didn't fossilize. This was ejected into space and froze. When it reached the surface of the mass that it was ejected with, meaning the comet. So what I'm postulating is these densely populated bodies, when they were struck and exploded, what exploded or struck and then blown off a surface of a body like Mars, that you had life that was blown off into space with that other matter in clumps in many cases, trying to struggle to get to the surface of that clump to breathe, and then suddenly being exposed to space and just freezing in place. And so this head here is about 30 feet in diameter. So again, a Titan, but a much smaller one than the one I just suggested on Mars. But the head alone is as large as many large dinosaurs, the fossils found on Earth.
Hey, Tim, have you done
Yeah.
much research into humanoids or fossilized creatures on Earth? Like for instance, when we did our show with LA, his focus was terrestrial Earth. Obviously, what you've been presenting would be Mars, comets, things of that nature. Have you done any research into I guess what Tim has researched? In other words, these evidence of Nephilim or giants or fossilized creatures? Because I mean, I've seen the ancient, I say ancient, some of the photos and some of the things from the 1800s where there's 10-foot giants that you see these reports in these older newspapers, and then they go to the Smithsonian and then they get buried. Things of that nature. Have you done any research into that?
Yes, and I cover all that actually in my Solar Apocalypse series. I cover what's on Earth as well. So, I show examples, I show evidence for a Titan on Earth that's still buried, but it could be excavated because part of it's exposed on Earth's surface. That's over 500 feet in length, and it's a sea creature. And we know that because there are 3D radar scans of the thing. So you can see from the 3D radar scans what it actually looks like underground. And so there are some Titans, at least on Earth, that can be dug up. And in terms of the humanoids you're talking about, those were all over the place, and they've largely disappeared. Somebody's absconded with them at this point behind the scenes. There's a lot of eyewitness testimony to them.
Like for instance, the Smithsonian or like X-Files. In other words, X-Files had the spooky spooks that were always hiding things from Mulder, and Mulder was somehow assigned to this weird task force, but he was never really he never could get behind the veil to see, because the super spooks had the real evidence being hidden.
Yeah, and I'll just say, in terms of Mars, for example, in the series, I show some examples of humanoid remains. They're also on Mars. So what I showed was obviously other kinds of things here on Mars. Let me go back for a minute and show a couple more things briefly on Mars. But
so let me just play the skeptic for a second here. So
yeah,
the head that you just showed us, supposed head, I'm kind of following what you're saying. I don't see it as clearly as you see it. I could just, how do I know you're not just, smoking something and seeing stuff? I mean, and it is, I agree that that kind of alligator looking thing on Mars looks kind of like an alligator, but we've got to be careful. There are things that we can find. We have like the devil's pylons. You have these rock structures on Earth that look very symmetrical. They're very impressive, but there is a natural explanation for those. So are we maybe jumping to conclusions? Are you jumping to conclusions without having
no? So let's come back
evidence?
To that head we'll come back to the head for a moment here.
Okay.
So comets and asteroids supposedly have no weathering capability, no atmosphere, no active electricity on the surface, such as lightning or that kind of thing, right? No active chemistry ostensibly other than just matter clumping, for ages and ages, for eons.
Okay.
That's the claim. There's no capacity, in other words, to have these things that are off color, that are completely different from the surroundings, that even would have the appearance of a creature-like structure. It should all be relatively flat and uniform in color and everything else. It's not what we find. And in fact, there are several comets and asteroids that have been photographed up close, mostly comets at this point, from 3 different space agencies, from the European Space Agency, JAXA, which is Japan Space Agency, and NASA. In all cases, the bodies that have been photographed are very rough on their surface. The material is loose rather than tightly compacted. The colors are broad ranged, and like this, lots of off-color objects and many things that look like heads, and in fact, in some cases, complete corpses exposed on the surfaces. So I'm showing that in a volume on comets and asteroids in my Solar Apocalypse series. So without going into too much more on that, I do address those kinds of questions in quite a bit of detail in the series. Mm-hmm. But let me come back to Mars for a moment. So I've got different things, creatures with exposed legs and so forth. Like this is a creature casting a shadow, that fossilized, presumably like a little dog, but not a dog-like head on Mars surface. That's an average photo. It's much better than what most people show on Mars, but for me, it's an average one. This is a good one. This is a segmented arthropod. And I don't know if you ever heard of Professor William Ramoser, but he was a professor emeritus for over 40 years of entomology at a university and wrote textbooks, college textbooks on entomology, well known. And he came out a few years ago and was trying to claim arthropodan life and reptilian life and even flying insectoid life on Mars based on photos that he found.
Mm-hmm.
And the photos that he shared, and he presented publicly to other entomologists on this at a conference more than once. The photos that he presented were very, very poor compared to what you're looking at on your screen right now.
Mm-hmm.
I showed him this one. He doesn't know where this one is. I do, on Mars. I showed him this one, and he immediately recognized it as a large arthropod. And what you see here are a V shape for like wing-like appendages here, a segmented body. This is the head, 3 sets of legs. You can see 3 that are fully exposed and segmented. They're highly angular and curved in some cases on one side of the body, a mantid-like head, the eyes, the mouth. This is actually a humanoid skull beneath it. And so just so you're aware, these photos, because they're in this slide for a presentation, are a little bit blurry. I have slightly better ones that I'll be showing in the book. And this is unedited other than running it through some HDR software and putting a copyright across it. I shared this first in 2016 publicly, but this is actually a humanoid skull between the legs of this thing. There's somebody who claims to have been on Mars, a so-called SSP or Secret Space Program whistleblower,
Mm-hmm.
who in 10 hours of testimony to me, which is recorded and someday I'll share it publicly, who didn't know anything about me or that I had any of these photos, didn't know anything except that he was asked to let me interview him, and he did. And I did 10 hours of recorded interviews with him. One of the things that he described to me was this creature, and he called it a truck-sized locust with a mantid-shaped head that was carnivorous, and if one was chasing you on Mars, you might as well sit down. It's going to come and kill you and eat you because it's too fast. That was his claim. Now, this one's dead. This is a fossil. Flash fossilized like that nodosaur, but almost completely exposed on one side on Mars. And I give a lot of examples in a series like that. This is just a head right here with mandible-like appendages, also sitting on Mars with an ornate base for the neck, an exposed head right here. I have a lot of bizarre things no one else has seen. Here's a completely exposed creature, and again, run through some HDR software. The sharper photos, and I haven't shared the best ones yet because I don't want NASA to be able to take them and locate where they've got these in their archives. But this thing's actually eating something. It's got an amphibian-like mouth, rectangular ears, a jointed shoulder here like an insectoid shoulder, and it's a folded leg right here. It's actually folded, and wing-like appendages that are folded on the back. This is fully exposed on its left side. It's probably about the size of a human being, but it has a very intelligent-looking forehead. So there are a lot of things like that that I show in the coming Solar Apocalypse series. Now I want to jump past all of this to the moon for just a moment and let you all ask questions, because I know our time is very, very short here. Okay, so I don't have the moon in this set. Let's see, where can I go? I'll go to my presentation on YouTube just to make it easy to see it. If you hear audio from this, tell me I'll mute it. There's one photo I want to show on the moon. Right here. Okay. So this was photographed by Apollo astronauts on the lunar surface in person. There were a lot of fossils that they photographed on the moon, including fossils emerging from the surface. This is a creature where you can see the full shoulder here almost, the full portion of the leg facing the camera. Those are five toes or claws from the paw right here, just like you'd see on a creature on Earth. Then the eye area, the mouth. So basically the head, the shoulder, the leg, one portion of it, and then a paw. They photographed all kinds of things like this. So our moon, in other words, Doug, was habited prior to Noah's flood as well.
So how did you come about these photos? I mean, what gave you the inspiration to go and look at the photos that NASA took from Mars and from the moon and then say, I bet there's something up there?
I didn't think there was anything up there. And in fact, I was shocked. I was simply purely curious when I first looked at Mars images just to see what the rovers were photographing. And, as it is the needle in the haystack thing. People can look for this stuff forever and not find it. There are hundreds. When I was finding these, like even in 2016, there were hundreds of thousands of images just of Mars that were available already that NASA had posted. Many of them large, so you'd have to zoom in and to see things in the background, and large stuff like this. So if you didn't know where to look, you wouldn't find it. So I've done a few things in the Solar Apocalypse series. One is I've worked with a couple of software developers, and they've produced the ability in their software, and these are freeware packages, to see the XY coordinates, like you see right down here in this still, of the location of an object in a panorama. And in one of those packages, the ability to key in those XY coordinates and the zoom level that you want to directly go to that spot in the large image. So in the series, I'm providing the links to directly download many of these images and the XY coordinates for things like this, so people can go and directly verify that these are from the space agencies and they are not tampered.
And Tim, I mean, obviously there's some pushback, and you're probably used to this, but one of the questions Mark said, did God say he created any creatures on the moon, or was it just the lesser light? Now, I'll lead you a little bit. This is what I try to do with clients when I'm trying to make sure, but you're not saying that initially there was anything that God created on the moon or Mars. You're saying this was part of the Genesis 6 incursion, the Nephilim, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
These were not creations. This was not part of the original plan, hence the destruction that happened on Earth. You're just saying that in addition to what happened on Earth, there was a wider solar system wide destruction, judgment.
Yes, God was judging what the Nephilim were doing all over our solar system, where they were effectively trying to become their own quote unquote gods over their own worlds. And so, they were hybrids, right? Human angel hybrids. They set about to try to hybridize life on Earth after their own image, if you will, and to supplant what God made. In other words, to produce things that were bigger, badder, faster, by violating the genetic barriers that God put in place that creatures could only reproduce after their own kind. So they were doing any kind of hybridization they could, quote unquote, achieve, and then seeding that all over the solar system, and in some cases to Earth. And with the flood on Earth, God wiped all of that out, pretty much all of it. You could argue whether Nessie, for example, if Nessie existed, was some surviving hybrid, but on Earth, it was pretty much all wiped out except for the creatures that God made here, because he preserved them.
So are you suggesting that all the dinosaurs are like fallen angel inspired beings?
No, just the dangerous, carnivorous, deadly ones, not the one,
like
God made Behemoth. God made Behemoth. He made Leviathan. He made large creatures.
Okay. Leviathan's dangerous. I mean,
well, it depends on whether you're talking about a whale, right?
Well, it's definitely not a whale in the Book of Job.
Yeah. No, it's not. You're right. But
it's a fire-breathing dragon. I mean, it's
we get to eat it.
Proud of it.
I don't recall Job talking about fire-breathing. I'd have to look that up if that's.
But it's very much fire-breathing.
Interesting.
Apparently, Leviathan is clean, because don't we eat it at the end? Isn't there a big old Leviathan barbecue?
No, well, I don't know that it's clean.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
But I mean, no, the Leviathan in Job is definitely a fire breather. It says here, let's see, his sneezings flash forth light, and his eyes are like the eyelids of the morning. Out of his mouth go burning light. Sparks of fire shoot out. Smoke goes out of his nostrils as from a boiling pot, and burning rushes. His breath kindles coals, and a flame goes out of his mouth. So
I have a question for you, Doug. Would you potentially take that as metaphorical or descriptive of modern weaponry?
I would take that as a fire-breathing dragon.
Okay.
I don't see any reason to.
In Job's context, I wouldn't. Yeah, not a weapon. So
I think God is. He talks about Behemoth, and that fits the description quite well of a Diplodocus dinosaur. A sauropod, probably a Diplodocus. It's got a tail that's about 40 feet long, the length of a of a tree, whichever one I'm trying to think of. And so then he boasts about, God is saying, hey, what about Leviathan, right? I already also made him, and check him out. He's pretty amazing. So I think these are two real creatures that God made. I think the fact that people around the world talk about dragons as being real fire-breathing kind of creatures, I think they're real. I don't think we have any more today, but I think there was a time. Now, okay, so we started off with, alien bodies with 3 fingers or hands discovered. You were pretty quick to dismiss that, but now you're asking us to believe that you've looked at some pictures from Mars and from the moon that, okay, they're interesting. I grant you that. They are very interesting photos, but they could just be rocks. They could be, shadows. It could be a lot of things that we don't know. So I'm just wondering, you were quick to dismiss that this thing was an alien, looks pretty fake, but then you want us to believe that these pictures you're showing us are actual, dogs and
Okay, so first of all,
things.
most of these fossils, like on Mars surface, they are rocks, but they were creatures that turned to stone. So that's the first point I'll make.
That's your claim. That's your claim.
Well, it's more than that. So in other words,
what is
in science, in physics and chemistry and geography and geologic processes, there's zero possibility over any period of time to produce something like this facial feature, this head right here with a mouth, the slot for the mouth, the rectangular ear, the nodules around the shoulder, folded leg. In other words, it would be like saying it's very much the same argument in some ways as arguments against macroevolution. It would be like saying you could have random processes produce a Boeing 747. So it looks like a plane over some period of time, and it's, and saying it's not what it looks like. So,
well, it looks like a rock to me. It does look like a rock.
Maybe that one. Okay, so let's go to a different one. It's not a rock. Maybe the copyrights here are obscuring it for you, but we can look at something like this right here, where you've got the segmented legs and so forth. So, for example, Professor Moser looked at this and he immediately recognized it as an arthropod and not as just a rock. But I would say that you're looking at a creature turned to rock, to stone. This is a fossil.
No, I understand fossilization can happen quickly. I'm well aware of that. I know it doesn't take millions of years, as we've been told. We saw this. It can happen quite quickly. But that's beside the point. How fast fossilization can happen doesn't prove that this is a dump truck size locust. Okay.
Well, not the size, but it does prove it's a fossil.
But what we do know is it is some rocks. We agree with that. It is a photo that you've looked at. And the shape is, it is interesting. And if I give a little bit of imagination, I'm like, okay, it kind of looks like a bug. But that doesn't prove that it was a bug the size of a dump truck that turned to stone.
Well, there are only 2 possibilities, Doug. One is somebody created a sculpture that looks like a creature, or it's a fossil. Those are literally the only 2 possibilities.
I disagree with that.
And
I disagree.
Well, I understand, but
I'll say, let me that you have a rock
let me give a little context to what I'm saying.
Okay.
If you were to go into the news today and look for finds on fossils that paleontologists are putting out as fossils anywhere in the world, the vast majority of the photos that they're showing, that they're saying, well, I found this fossil or that fossil, are utterly inferior to what you're looking at here on the screen. And all of those paleontologists looking at something like this would immediately recognize it as a fossil.
The difference, though, and I'm not anyone to defend Lucy or anything like that. I got to go to Ethiopia some years ago, and I got to see Lucy, and there wasn't much of her. Let me just say that. There were a few fragmented bones, and there she was, Lucy, right? You had, I forget how many bones it was, but it was quite embarrassing, to say the least. And then they came up with this whole story about Lucy. But they did have some bones. I'll give them that. You have a picture. Okay. You have a picture and it's kind of grainy. So, again, you're asking me to say that there's only 2 possibilities. I disagree with that. I think you can have rock formations that just happen to look like things, and it doesn't prove that the correlation and causation thing, right? So just because we have a correlation that you have a rock formation that kind of looks like this and under the right lighting, and if you stand on your head, it kind of looks that way, then it doesn't prove that that's actually that.
Except, Doug, that these are unambiguous.
Wait a second.
These are not just rock formations. They're unambiguous.
Wait a second. But part of your thesis is that it was the Nephilim or the sons of God that had this other program. So I feel like it's kind of circular reasoning that you're showing me, well, hey, this is how they got there, and I'll look at these things, and so therefore that proves that they did it.
All right. So the basis for saying
I don't see anything in Scripture that says that they went off planet. To do their
that's
thing.
True. That's true.
Okay.
But if you don't accept that explanation, you have a problem.
I don't know.
Yeah, you do. Because
okay.
This iguana is on Mars and it looks just like iguanas on Earth. So either you have common genomes and you have to say that they were seeded from a common source and that God created life on Mars, or life made it somehow from Earth to Mars or Mars to Earth.
Well,
in which case you have a bigger can of worms biblically than to suggest that the Nephilim did this.
But Tim, you're making the claim that that's an iguana.
It is.
Again, I'm looking at it. I'm like, okay, it does remind me of an iguana, but it doesn't mean that it's an iguana. It could just be a strange looking rock. I've come across strange looking rocks in my life, and I don't always assume that it's a fossilized iguana. And
yeah, you won't find one like that anywhere, Doug. I mean, you could search your whole life on Earth and find nothing like that unless it's a fossil exposed on the surface. So take a look at this one. This is another one on Mars. You've got it, by the way, in the sharper photo of this, and it's because it's in a presentation, it's a little less sharp. You're not seeing it fully blown up, but you can see 5 teeth between the beaks here. This is the lower beak, the upper beak. The upper beak is striated like you see on a lot of reptiles on Earth. This is a wingtip right here. So you're looking at the head, I think, as something similar to a pterosaur, only this is exposed from the side of a hill on Mars.
So how did the sons of God get all these creatures there?
Anti-gravity craft, same way they travel the stars today. In fact, you can get
craft. Okay.
Yep, UFOs. You can travel to Mars literally in a matter of minutes in one of those craft.
Have you seen one of these craft before?
I've seen these craft. Yes, I have.
Where?
And they're on military bases. They're in clandestine facilities. So yeah.
How did you get?
They exist.
You went to a military base or a clandestine?
No, I can't.
You have to kill me if you tell me. Okay.
I can't discuss that, but I can tell you they exist.
Okay.
And my testimony on that really doesn't matter at this point. There's a vast amount of public video and photo footage, on the internet that's real.
I'm not disputing. I'm not disputing that there are UFOs. I myself believe in the sightings. I talk about them in Corrupting the Image Volume 3. So we're not far apart on that. But you're now saying that these sons of God did they take creatures, or did they create their own creatures on Mars? What is it that you're actually suggesting here?
I don't know where they did it. They could have done it aboard the craft in laboratories. They could have done it on Earth before the flood in laboratories. They could have done it in space, or on Mars itself in laboratories. What I'm suggesting is they took life that God made here and they hybridized it. And they took the hybrids that they felt they could make survive, sufficiently survivable, and seeded them all over the solar system. And there's a vast variety on Mars, a vast variety.
So it wasn't just Mars, but they did it elsewhere.
Yes. So every comet and asteroid that's been photographed up close so far is got these heads and other fossils just literally all over their surfaces. And so that tells me that these objects are not building blocks for planetary bodies, but are debris from formerly populated bodies. And then likewise, Mars, there are fossils everywhere you look almost, if you know what you're looking at. And good ones like this that are pretty obvious. They're rare, but they are there. There are enough of them. So even me, I've looked at, I've got tens of thousands of examples. If I had a lifetime that I could invest in just this search, I'm sure I could, have hundreds of thousands by the end of my lifetime. If an army of people wanted to look at all of these photos that are already available from these space agencies, I would imagine there would be many more examples like this and things rivaling or even superior to this that others would find.
Wow. Well, okay. It's fascinating. Where can people find this again, Tim?
On, my YouTube channel, which is just author Tim Cohen. Let me go back to it. So it's just youtube.com/author Tim Cohen.
Okay.
And then for the Solar Apocalypse series at prophecyhouse.com. It's not published yet, so look for that sometime next year.
Okay.
So this is the outline of the volumes. It'll be reorganized a little bit by the time it's published. It's a massive undertaking and will have taken several years to complete by the time it's published next year. But what I will say too, and I briefly touched on this in a couple other interviews, but there are artificial structures that are very obvious and artificial objects that are very obvious on Mars. And I show a number of those in the series as well. Intelligent design.
Awesome. We've got a few questions. One of them is, Tim, is there really a huge face on the moon? And is it a Nephilim
I think
head?
that was a joke.
That's a joke.
Pretty sure.
All right.
Yeah, not on the moon, and
Okay.
what's at Cydonia, it's arguable whether it's a face or just a decayed mountain.
Okay. Well, I think this is a real question. What about there was war in heaven? The fallen ones existed before they were cast down to earth. This war in heaven could have had repercussions on other planets. My take on that is that's Revelation 12. I don't think there's a war. There has not been a war in heaven yet. Not at least not the Revelation 12 war. If there's any other war, I don't recall it ever being written down in Scripture. So,
question for you: did they see my screen when I was sharing it? Because I know it's not.
Yeah,
up
I
now
shared that.
for-
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
So there are people who want to know when the angels themselves transgressed and fell initially, right? Because we know that happened before Satan deceived Eve in the Garden of Eden.
Well, we don't know that, honestly.
You
I
don't think so?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Well, Satan himself, Lucifer, had fallen, right? Before he deceived Eve.
Not in my opinion. No, I think he was in process.
Okay. Well, then that's where you and I would disagree. But that being said, my postulation for when the angels themselves fell would be on the fourth day of the creation week.
That they fell. Okay.
When they transgressed and fell and rebelled against God. Yeah. That's my supposition.
Okay. I mean, we're off by a few days.
Yeah.
My opinion, and I document, well, I argue this case in Corrupting the Image Volume 2, is that Satan had the really naughty intentions in his heart when he went to Adam and Eve in Genesis chapter 3, and he knew what he was going to do. He was the guy with the gun that hadn't pulled the trigger yet. Okay. He fully intended to commit murder, but he hadn't done the dirty deed yet. And so only in Genesis 3 is when he actually does that. He comes into the garden as God's prime minister. They recognize him. I think he looked kind of dragon-ish. And they're like, oh, it's you. We know you, because God actually stationed him there to protect the garden, to protect those things in the garden. That was his sanctuary that he then defiled, right? So, it could be just as maybe, a doctor is still legit until he goes and does that bad thing, or whoever, the policeman, that he's a good cop until the moment that he's not, and so that's how I would suggest it. So we might be off by a week, maybe 2. I don't know how long they were in the garden. That's really hard to say. But I think that he went in there still as a quote unquote good guy, but with evil intentions in his heart. And then once he did that, that is when we see God cast him to the ground, as per Ezekiel 28 and Isaiah 14.
And I'm in the minority.
So,
I believe it was before day 1. You know,
Oh man, you're way off on that one.
yeah,
Scott.
yeah. Well,
We
no.
can talk about that.
In this little panel of 3 right here, I'm definitely in the minority. They in the beginning was, I don't know how many years before day 1. So I believe, because again, I'll look at Job. I will go to Job 38, and where the sons of God shouted for joy.
Yeah.
We know the sons of God were created when the foundations of the earth were laid, and that says in the beginning. So that would be before day 1, just briefly.
Not at all.
Yeah, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth.
Right,
Day
and the
1,
earth was without form and void.
Exactly.
Right? So he was still making it. But yes, I would agree that they were created
Hebrew
at that
scholar,
time.
the word can mean became.
No, dude.
Yes.
No. All those guys are just full of it. They don't know what they're talking about.
Okay.
They don't know their Hebrew. It's the word haita, which means was. If they wanted to use a nephal, then they could have used one. God could have used a nephal. He didn't use a nephal. Why didn't he? Because he wasn't trying to say that.
My Hebrew scholar friend is going to go all Hebrew scholar on me.
Because it annoys me. These guys don't know Hebrew, but they're like making big claims about it.
Yeah, I don't do Hebrew debates with you. So.
Yeah, but you still hold to these other views. That's fine. So it's all good, man. It's all good.
Yeah.
We're just speculating here. Well,
theorizing.
We're theorizing. That's it. Yes, we're theorizing. Okay,
and
so
even Tim would say he's theorizing. I mean, we don't.
I know.
Well, I'm not. I would not say that about what I'm claiming is on Mars, the Moon, and comets and asteroids. But that being said, I would theorize that the deception itself, in terms of the humanoids and the anti-gravity craft today, is intended to spur mankind, humanity, to turn their weapons of war against Christ and his angels when he comes back, as if that were an alien invasion. And that the humanoids and their anti-gravity craft, et cetera, and some of these secret programs behind the scenes with various governments, including our own, the federal government, and military-industrial complex, that they are providing technology in exchange for abducting humans and producing new versions of humanoids, making false claims like, well, we've so tampered with ourselves over the eons, we can no longer reproduce successfully, so we need to incorporate humanity to produce a new version of ourselves to succeed ourselves, maybe to succeed all of us. And we'll give you technology, meanwhile, if you'll allow us to just use life from Earth for that purpose, and we'll try to kill as little as possible. And yeah, and I think the governments behind the scenes are saying, well, we don't know if they're telling the truth, if they're malevolent, if they're really here to help us, if they really are going to fight alongside us, if the malevolent aliens invade, as they're suggesting, or that kind of thing. So we'll take the technology. Thank you very much. And if it turns out they're lying to us, well, we'll be in a better position, at least, to try to defend ourselves when the time comes. Something along those lines.
Jay is asking if you believe in the alien abduction hybrid program.
Yes, it factually exists. And there's a huge amount of eyewitness testimony to it.
All right. Yeah. I believe that as well. I mean, I think we're pretty much on the same page.
Tim, you got Doug excited when you just talked about the cosmic.
Oh, yeah.
At the very end. I mean, he just put out, by the way, I'll plug his book, a book called Regenesis Code, in which there is the deception is that these are aliens. In other words, that even the 2 witnesses, which Doug and I differ a little bit, I believe there literally could be 2 witnesses, but it's more of a corporate body. But there will be supernatural types of powers that will be explained away by the alien phenomenon, by the X-Men phenomenon. In other words, these people, these Christians, these believers that are now warding these things off are doing it because they've been empowered by aliens. And then you've got the other set of bad aliens that, no, we're here to help you. We want to make you, or we created you. We're your real gods. And so that's sort of the deception, and Doug and I both align on that. We don't align on a few things. He's wrong on quite a bit, but on that, I think he's correct.
Fair enough.
Yeah, their technology is superior, but from what I've heard, and what I believe I've seen, in most cases, the humanoids are biologically inferior to human beings. They're weaker, they're frailer. They are engineered to handle space better, like the Greys are, but they're inferior in a lot of ways, other than bigger cranial capacity, for their body size in some cases, things like that. they're built to purpose in a sense, but they are inferior to human beings in my view. And so they're not like the X-Men type thing, when you see it in science fiction and they think they're going to make bigger, badder humanoids, like Superman or that kind of thing. And yeah, there's a lot I could say about that, but I think
Captain America. Captain America would, I guess, be the one in which they did transform a little puny private into Captain America. And I mean, that was 100% genetic engineering. A transhuman would be an example.
So we've got a question from Brad. Tim, he's directing this to you. The scientists and doctors said they are making the DNA testing. This is about that alien, supposed alien, CT scans, X-rays, etc., available to all researchers so they could do their own research on the corpses. So do you think there's a chance that there might be something to this? We certainly went far off into Mars and all that stuff, but I don't know. I mean, do you think it's at all possible, or are you just kind of convinced that whole thing is a hoax?
I'll say a couple of things. There have been other skulls found on Earth that are far more convincing with DNA testing and analysis that's been provided publicly that clearly are humanoid. I don't know why those aren't in the news and this is instead. That's the first thing I'll say. The second thing I'll say is if this does prove to be legitimate, then I would want to know, how did the guy who made ET get a hold of one before it became public just now, right? Because he made the face look a lot like one of these things, right? In the recent photos. I mean, they look very similar to ET. Even the proportions of the head look a lot like ET. I mean, that in my mind is probably not coincidence. And
but couldn't somebody just quip that, well, that's because ET looks like some of the things that people have been seeing? I mean, I think that's a pretty easy,
the vast majority of testimonies and sketches and things provided by people who claim to have been abducted or had experiences or encounters with humanoids, not one of them, to my knowledge, has ever portrayed anything like what's in these two photos, this recent discovery or find or fraud, whichever it is. So it's different enough to be like in a class of its own almost, if it were real.
Okay. Yeah, I know. For me, it's a big question mark. I think something like this, it comes out with a bang, and then it starts to fizzle once it really gets challenged. That's my feeling of what's going to happen here, is that give it a few more days, people are going to challenge it. Somebody will look at the whatever evidence that they're providing, and I think it's going to be probably debunked. In my humble opinion. Now, if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. I'm happy to be wrong about that. And if this turns out to be legitimate, then I'll definitely eat humble pie. I don't have any problem with that. But I get the feeling, and I tell you, I met the guy some years ago. We're not like buddies or anything, but I was all excited about what he was presenting at first for this MUFON conference that I was at. And then I started doing a lot more research on him, and it seems like he's kind of a serial hoaxer. And that's kind of the impression I'm getting right now. It's interesting that the whole world, I mean, it's, if it shows up on mainstream news, then, then it's caught the attention of ABC and Drudge and all these other places, Fox News and whatnot. So that's definitely interesting. It's different. That usually doesn't happen, but it doesn't entirely prove that it's real. So, Brad, I guess I'll kind of take your question. I think it's one thing to claim that DNA testing and all this other stuff has been done, is now available, but it's another when we actually start to see the evidence and individual third-party researchers and specialists start taking a look at it. I have a feeling it's going to all just crumble, but let's just assume for a second that it's real. I mean, just for the fun of it, if this were real, I think that this would open up a lot of intrigue about aliens, about our origins, about, how are we related or not? If this thing is indeed 30% human, as they're claiming, then, what does that say about the human race? I think for many decades, probably longer, generations, really, we've had this whole scenario that, we've evolved from the goo to the zoo to you. That's the basic idea. And where did all that DNA come from? Well, probably from outer space. It somehow just happened to make it here. You have, what's it, Crick, who is the co-discoverer of DNA. He came up with a book called, what was it called? I don't know. I forget the name of the book, but it's about directed panspermia. Maybe that was the name of it. I think it was directed panspermia, the name of the book. And the whole idea is that somehow the double helix hitched a ride on maybe a spaceship. Maybe it was brought here intentionally. Maybe it somehow just happened to get here. But in any event, it didn't just happen to come about on planet Earth, but it was somehow delivered here in one form or another. And that is how human life essentially began. And we see things like this in movies all the time. Prometheus was very much on the nose about how this happened, that our creators many, many millions of years ago came and some guy drank some weird potion and then his DNA, like he disintegrated into the rivers. And from there, give it a couple million years and bada boom, bada bing, here we are. And you got life on planet Earth. Okay. So, and then humanity goes to meet their makers and turns out we don't like them too much. They're real jerks. I think these are the scenarios that are playing in the background. So whether this particular alien, supposed alien, is real or not, I think it continues to drive people in a direction that is rather anti-God to some degree. Not that it's impossible for God to make other life forms on other planets. It's just the Bible is completely silent about it, and everything that we've seen so far seems to be rather hostile, antithetical to the Bible. And the people that have various experiences, have encounters with UFOs and whatnot, it always becomes some kind of a spiritual experience. It's weird that these aliens, they're so incredibly advanced, but they can't just show up and say hello, and they have to go through some kind of a seance, or they have to, be channeled, and they can't just, pick up a microphone and start talking or something. So I don't know. There's a lot of weird stuff that's going on, but I think it's all part of the bigger deception to get humanity. And thank you, Scott, for the plug. So if you guys are interested, my fictional take on that is Regenesis Code, but a lot of that is based on Corrupting the Image volumes 1, 2, and 3. So
I'll make a couple quick comments about all that. A lot of people don't know it, but Charles Darwin was related to the British monarchy. He's buried in Westminster Abbey. Yeah, and so when you talk about other people, watch my other interviews and so forth, you'll see that I'm putting out evidence that King Charles III is the Antichrist, the fourth horseman of the apocalypse, the one who will be over a global government during the Great Tribulation and possessed by the devil. But anyway, Charles Darwin is related to that family and honored to the extent that he's buried in Westminster Abbey. And when you talk about directed panspermia, you've got a lot of these people today who can't accept the biblical or refuse to accept the biblical account of God creating life here on Earth originally. And so they're looking, and they also realize that just in terms of chemistry and physics, the explanations of macroevolution for the supposed development of life on Earth are impossible scientifically. So they're trying to come up with another explanation to say it was seeded here from elsewhere. But the reality is it was seeded elsewhere from here. And then the final thing I'll say is, if God did create life on any other world and that life dies, that would be, in my view, contrary to Scripture. Scripture suggests that it was due to Adam's sin that death entered creation. Certainly, at least death occurred on Earth as a consequence of Adam's sin. And it's my take, my understanding of Scripture that there wasn't death in creation itself prior to Adam's sin. And if that's true, if it is, then there wouldn't be a basis for God to have created life on other worlds so far. And we could be, in the distant future, viewed as those ancient, quote unquote, humans or aliens or whatever on other worlds. Humanity could be viewed that way in the distant future.
Yeah. If people are interested, they can check out your book, The Antichrist and a Cup of Tea. Tim and I don't exactly agree on that, but I think he makes an excellent case for King Charles being the Antichrist. I don't hold to that conclusion, but you can check out his stuff and judge for yourself. So I think
yes, and Doug, just years from now, you will agree with me. Wait for it.
I'm sure I will. I'm sure.
Well, if Chucky sits up on the holy topos, the location, and declares himself to be God, then I'm pretty sure at that point in time, Doug and I, especially if all of a sudden, the mark of the beast is implemented and our bank accounts are shut off, and we're going to get on board.
Yeah, well, things will happen even before that. Charles is going to be going to Israel soon, so see what happens.
Well, is he going to be there in the next 3 weeks? Because I'll be there. I don't think he would say
the date hasn't been specified yet, but what's interesting?
Maybe April 2024. I'm going there. If people want to go, sign up. thewaycongregation.com.
But they created a crown for the Messiah there, a gold crown supposedly in Israel, a special Torah scroll. Who will they give it to? They're expecting that individual to visit from outside Israel. So what will they do when Charles visits?
All I know is if I'm over there and Chucky shows up during Tabernacles and there's all of a sudden a secret ceremony, I might just, if we're in Jerusalem, I might travel outside of Jerusalem for the day. Just say,
all right.
Just say.
And Tim, if King Charles has a heart attack and dies, you're going to come back on the show and you're going to explain to us what the next step is. Okay.
But of course, I'm telling you in advance that won't happen, right? I'm saying that's
we have you on record. And,
you sure do. Yep. You got me where it hurts if you want to in the future if that happens, but it won't happen.
Okay. All right. Well, anyway, people can check out your book, Antichrist and a Cup of Tea. It's not my cup of tea, but I think I think Tim probably makes one of the best cases for that. And so check that out, guys. Thank you, everyone. Sorry that we were late. That was my fault. Mea culpa. Hit the wrong button. And anyway, but we had a lot of fun. I want to thank, of course, Scott, and I want to thank Tim for coming on the show. Guys, if you have never been to Israel, come with us next year. The Way Congregation is going April 2024. You can go to thewaycongregation.com for more information about that. It's going to be an incredible trip. And get the Regenesis Code. You're gonna love it. If you don't want to buy it, just listen. It's right here on YouTube. Go to my channel or just put in Regenesis Code. It's about 10 hours, read by yours truly, and I think you're gonna love it. The goal is for us to make this into a serialized movie, sort of, Netflix style or something like that. Where we can really get this message in front of people, because people are not going to church nowadays. They're not reading their Bibles. So let's put the story in front of them. Now, this isn't the Bible. It is obviously fiction, but it has a lot of biblical elements in there. And I don't want to give it all away, but there's some really cool arcs and all this really fun stuff of where the gospel will be presented in time, and people will see that. And I'm convinced that is how, this is an incredible tool that we have to get the message of the kingdom in front of people. All right. In a kind of a fun way. Okay. So check it out, pray about it. If you would consider, getting behind this. We are going to be coming up with a crowd funding page and other things. And so you can get involved with that and help us make this a reality. So until next time, God bless you guys, and have a great week.